A youthful person of color named Andre is strolling alone around evening time through an impeccably manicured rural road. A little games vehicle pulls up and begins gradually following him. Andre gets frightened, says, "Screw this crap," and takes an alternate route to energetically stroll back the manner in which he came. At the point when he goes to see what the vehicle did, he sees it's left where it was, yet the entryway is open. Suddenly, a man in a middle-aged cap assaults Andre, renders him oblivious, and hauls his body to the vehicle. Rose shows up at her photographic artist beau Chris' loft with cakes and espresso. They're preparing to disappear for the end of the week to visit her family, and he's worried that they don't have the foggiest idea about she's dating a person of color. She guarantees him that, while they will probably express a few moronic things, they are inconceivably moderate. Her father would have even decided in favor of Obama a third time on the off chance that he could have. Chris inquires as to whether he's the main person of color she's always dated, and she says he is. However, she's certain that her folks will be thoroughly cool. On the ride to her folks' home, Chris goes for a cigarette, however Rose takes it and tosses it through the window, advance notice that her folks would detest that she dates a smoker. Chris calls his pal Paul, a TSA specialist at the neighborhood air terminal, and helps him to take care to remember his canine and not to take care of him, individual's food. Bart, disliking Chris dating a white lady, upbraids him and says visiting the white society is an impractical notion. He likewise plays a piece with endlessly. Rose believes it's sweet when Chris gets a piece desirous. While they're somewhere down in discussion and not completely focusing out and about, a deer darts out before the vehicle and is hit. They head over to explore and call the police, who ask what they're doing nearby. Rose lets them know that they're visiting her family who live close by. The official requests to see Chris' ID, however Rose strides in and says that since he wasn't getting there's no requirement for that. The official lets them go, and Chris tells Rose that it was hot the manner in which she went to bat for him against the bigoted cop. Chris and Rose show up at her folks' home. Her dad, Dignitary Armitage, is a friendly neurosurgeon who, indeed, lets Chris know that he would have decided in favor of Obama a third time in the event that he could have. Her mom, Missy, is a peculiarly chilly trance inducer. She offers to fix Chris of his nicotine enslavement through entrancing, yet he doesn't feel cool with individuals tooling around in his mind. The Armitages additionally have two on-location dark aides, Walter the maintenance man, and Georgina, the servant/maid. Senior member recognizes that it looks terrible, two well-off white individuals having two assistants who are dark, yet they were recruited to deal with his folks, and Dignitary would have felt awful letting them go. Something doesn't add up about both Walter and Georgina. They have a clear firm step forward fake respectfulness about them. They likewise both talk utilizing dated vernacular. Senior member provides Chris with a visit through the house and shows him old family photographs. The family gets together for evening tea. Missy blends her tea and gently taps her spoon against the teacup multiple times, very significant later. Missy gets some information about Chris' folks. Chris claims that his dad left when he was youthful and his mom kicked the bucket subsequent to being hit by a vehicle when he was 11. Georgina kind of short-circuits while pouring tea, and Missy advises her to go rest and get some rest. The Armitages tell Rose that they're hosting their enormous get-together tomorrow. She's amazed and they advise her that it's that very day consistently. Rose's sibling Jeremy shows up. He's a forceful, ruined rich youngster. That evening at supper, an alcoholic Jeremy begins conversing with Chris about MMA battling, saying that Chris would be a characteristic at it because he comes from generous stock. He needs to fight, however Chris says that he has rules about play battling with alcoholics. Dignitary and Missy advise Jeremy that perhaps it's the ideal opportunity for him to hit the sack. Chris and Rose resign to their room where she is sorry for her family and they fall asleep. Around midnight, Chris gets up and chooses to escape for a cigarette. While outside he sees something somewhere far off charging at him. It's Walter. He goes directly toward Chris, however makes a sharp turn without a second to spare and runs off toward another path. Inside the house, Georgina is gazing through a window. It turns out she's seeing her own appearance, not Chris. She changes her hair and Chris chooses to head back inside. Before Chris can successfully return to his room, Missy frightens him by turning on a light. She says smoking is a vice and offers again to assist him with stopping. He sits however derides the thought of hypnotism, uninformed that she is gradually entrancing him, involving her teaspoon as a center item. She returns him to the night his mother kicked the bucket when he was 11, and he tells her that his mom didn't get back home from work and he was excessively terrified to do anything, similar to call the police, that would make it genuine, so he recently sat sitting in front of the television, apprehensively digging his nails into his bedposts. Present-day Chris is doing likewise, digging his nails into the arms of the seat. She taps her teacup with her spoon multiple times and advises him to sink. 11-year-old Chris sinks into his bed, while present-day Chris sinks into darkness, seeing himself and Missy far above. His cognizance has left his body, which is deadened in the seat. He wakes in the first part of the day and actually takes a look at his telephone. Chris tells Rose that he thinks her mother mesmerized him the previous evening. He has ambiguous memories of the night. The Armitage's affluent companions show up for the huge party. Generally more established white individuals direct numerous improper sentiments toward Chris, how he has a decent form, since Tiger Woods hits the fairway he should have a decent swing as well, are people of color better in bed, and so on. Chris sneaks off and finds a visually impaired man named Jim Hudson, Stephen Root, who says that every one individuals at the party are uninformed. He's a craftsmanship seller and Chris is very much aware of what his identity is. Jim says that he really loves Chris' work. He perceives the incongruity of a visually impaired workmanship vendor, however lets him know that he has a great right hand who is perfect at portraying pieces. He begrudges Chris' eye. Jim says that he personally attempted photography, however was never excellent at it. At the point when Chris returns to blending with the visitors, he finds another person of color. He's about Chris' age and Chris attempts to bond with him, however he also is firm and unnatural like Walter and Georgina. Yet, something about him appears to be recognizable to Chris. Chris chooses to check in with Paul once more, and he finds his telephone turned off once more. He connects it, calls Bart, and lets him know all that has been going on. Paul cautions him that white individuals love to have intercourse slaves and he really wants to leave. Rose finds Chris and he tells her how peculiar everything is and that his telephone was turned off once more. She lets him know he's simply being distrustful on the grounds what is going on. He concurs and she leaves. Barr advises Chris to snap a photo of the person of color and he will check whether he recollects that him. As Chris is going to leave, he's impeded by Georgina who apologizes for turning off his phone. She lifted it up while tidying the end table, and when it came turned off she would have rather not meddled with it further. He says that it's fine and that he didn't intend to rodent her out. She doesn't have the foggiest idea. So he explains that he didn't intend to cause her problems. She gets very bizarre and lets out a solitary tear while letting him know that the Armitages deal with her like family. Chris returns outside and attempts to circumspectly take the comfortable person of color's image with his wireless, yet has neglected to switch off the glimmer. When his telephone streaks, the man changes. He goes from excessively dull to raving. His nose begins draining and he hops at Chris telling him, "Get out. Get the fuck out while you actually can." Rose is gone nuts now as well. She asks her father what occurred and he clears up that the glimmer just caused the person for have a seizure. The man emerges and apologizes for disturbing everybody and says he should get back. Chris and Rose take a walk and Chris tells her that he's certain he perceived the fellow and that something odd is most certainly going on. She concurs by saying that it didn't appear to be a seizure by any means. Chris says that he'd truly prefer to return home at this point. Rose hesitantly concurs. She says she will make up something to tell her folks. Back at the house, Dignitary is holding a quiet sale with his visitors, who hold up bingo cards to offer. Close to him is an image of Chris. Jim Hudson wins the sale. Different visitors generally return home. Chris goes to pack his effects and gets a call from Paul, who lets him know that the person in the image is a person they knew named Dre, who used to work at a cinema yet disappeared half a month prior. The telephone battery kicks the bucket. Chris sees that the storeroom entryway is open. He peers inside and finds a crate loaded up with photographs of Rose presented sincerely with numerous other individuals of color. There are additionally photographs of her with both Walter and Georgina, who don't the slightest bit look like the automated forms Chris has met. Evidently Chris isn't the main individual of color Rose has been with all things considered. Rose returns and Chris says that he wants the keys to place their sacks in the vehicle. She searches for them in her handbag as they advance out of the house. Out of nowhere, Jeremy shows up, hindering the front entryway. Senior member and Missy are there as well. Jeremy is prepared to assault, yet Missy and Dignitary advise him to quiet down. Chris continues to advise Rose to get the keys. Missy and Dignitary let Chris know that they don't believe he should leave. Chris requests the keys once more and Rose says, tranquilly, "You realize I can't give you the keys." Chris at last understands that Rose also is in on anything this is. Jeremy assaults Chris. Dignitary shouts and Missy clunks the teaspoon on her glass, making Chris sink once more into the dead emptiness once more. In the interim, Bar continues to attempt to call Chris, yet it continues to go directly to phone message. He looks into the image of the person in the photograph and sees that he disappeared some time back, so he goes to the police. He lets a female official know that his kid was hijacked by white people to be a sex slave, very much like the missing person in the image. She brings in 2 additional officials to pay attention to Pole's story. At the point when he gets done, they generally burst out chuckling. No one will treat him in a serious way. Chris awakens to end up lashed to a seat before a mounted deer head in an old television. He watches a video made by senior member's dad that discussions about interminability, and so forth. Chris sees that his fingernails have mauled through the calfskin arm of the seat and uncovered the cushioning. The teacup and spoon show up on the screen once more. Chime chime and he's out. Pole attempts Chris' telephone once more and Rose replies. She lies by saying that Chris left 2 days prior and she's worried about his whereabouts as well. She guarantees that he left in a taxi or perhaps a Uber. Bar tells her that he went to the police and she appears to be concerned. He begins to understand that something is off base, so he attempts to record the call. However, when he begins conversing with her once more, she lets him know she realizes he really wants her. He tells her she's an insane bitch and hangs up. Chris awakens and Jim Hudson is on the screen. He lets Chris know that they will trade minds. The others at the party were tied in with being dark, yet Jim couldn't give to a lesser extent a poop about that. What he truly needs is to have the option to see the world through Chris' eyes. Senior member has consummated the neurosurgery to make this all conceivable. Furthermore, Missy entrances the body benefactors to prepare them for the technique. He will keep existing in obscurity void, yet will actually want to progress forward as kind of a traveler. The glimmering is a lamentable secondary effect as they saw before at the party. Chime chime of the teaspoon and Chris is out once more. Senior member and Jeremy prep Jim Hudson for a cerebrum relocate. Dignitary advises Jeremy to go get Chris. Jeremy goes a few doors down, we see now they were in the cellar of the house, and tracks down Chris oblivious. He removes his limitations and gets an IV prepared. Chris wasn't oblivious, all things considered. He'd stuffed cushioning from the seat in his ears to hinder the teaspoon. He takes out Jeremy. Senior member calls for Jeremy and leaves the lab region to search for him. Chris surges him and skewers him with the deer tusks from the other room. He thumps over a flame that lights the sweeping covering Jim Hudson as well. Rose has headphones in and doesn't know any of this is going on. While she pays attention to music, she is finding out about pictures of attractive-looking individuals of color with great constitutions. Chris goes higher up and tracks down Missy. She goes for the teacup and spoon, yet Chris beats her to them and crushes the cup. Rather, she goes after him with a blade, however he turns it on her and cuts her to death. Chris goes for the front entryway once more, yet Jeremy has returned and places him in a stranglehold. 2 times Chris battles to pull open the front entryway, yet Jeremy kicks it shut. On the 3rd attempt, as Jeremy kicks the entryway, Chris wounds him in the leg and breaks his skull with ruthless head steps. He runs outside and gets into Jeremy's vehicle. On the front seat is the middle-aged head protector from prior. He begins down the carport, however hits Georgina. He can't simply let her lie there as he did his mother, so he gets her in the vehicle and go on down the carport. She awakens and goes after him. In the process her hairpiece tumbles off and we see she has a scar across her head from a mind relocate as well. They collide with a tree and she kicks the bucket. Rose hears this through her headphones. Out of nowhere, the back view reflect is blown away. Rose is coming after Chris with a rifle. He implores her to stop, yet she sees Georgina and alludes to her as grandmother. Rose shoots once more and misses Chris. Suddenly, Walter runs past Rose in quest for Chris, and Rose says, "Get him, Granddad," as he handles Chris. They wrestle on the ground, and Chris snaps his photo. Streak. Walter turns and asks Rose for her rifle. She gives it to him, and he shoots her in the stomach, prior to directing the rifle back toward himself. Rose is on the ground draining out. She attempts to go after the rifle, however Chris bats it away. As he twists around her, Rose puts a hand on his cheek and lets Chris know that she cherishes him. Chris begins to gag Rose, however stops, he can't proceed with it. A squad car pulls up. Rose calls feebly for help, realizing the nearby police will toss Chris behind bars. Be that as it may, it's Bar getting out of the squad car. Chris gets into the vehicle. Pole takes a gander at the tumult and says, "Man, I told you not to go in that house." When Chris asks Bar how he found him, Bar makes sense of that he works for the TSA and that all that will be okay. Rose grins with her final gasp as Bar and Chris crash away into the evening. The film closes with Bar pushing Chris away from the scene as Rose lies dead in the street. Thank you for watching and see you again in another movie.